So I haven't made these in a while, but they're pretty cute and I think they're worthwhile. This is the one I showed you before, and it has a layer of fabric with this polyester type of fabric with this really thick glittery stuff on it, and then it has this fabric on the back, and I've sewn them together through some felt. And so on this, the one we're going to make today, I've got 5 petals on the back and then 5 petals on the front, and then I cut this out of cork, which we're going to talk about because we're going to play with it for the next video or two, and then an antique button that I happen to know belonged to my grandmother. And so we're going to make a stuffed flower, and I'm going to show you how to do this. And I wanted to tell you that when I lay out for this, I really don't go anywhere near the cutting mat. I just go straight to my scraps and I just grab stuff. But what I do is I get a piece, and you need to think in terms of right sides together. I get the part that I want to have on the back, and that's going to be this fabric, and that is going to be right sides together with, this is a piece of silk that I dyed. It was a scarf that had a really ratty part, and so I'm using that since I don't have that other stuff available. And you want to have that laid out flat on top of there, and then any fabric that you want to back up your see-through fabric. And you don't need to use a see-through fabric. You can just do 2 fabrics, one right sides together, and not have this layer over the top. I like to have it. I think it adds interest. I think it's pretty whether you just go to the store and pick up this kind of thing from the holiday fabrics or the Christmassy fabrics, or whether you use a piece of a silk scarf that's not in good shape anymore. And so this is how we set it up. It's 4 inches or so by 12 inches or so, and to do both layers like this, you're going to need to do this twice, and I would make one a little wider and one a little narrower. So maybe you would make one 3.5 inches and make the other one 4.5 inches or something like that. But you could play with this. You can do it any size, and then this you could tack on to some kind of a bag. I used to put them in the corner of watercolor wall hangings that I did. You could do all kinds of things. You could make this part of a fascinator or headband, anything you want to do with it. So this is not the way I want it. I want this piece of batting to be on the outside of my backing fabric of my petals, and it's going to end up on the inside. But I put it back here, and then I'm going to stitch, and I don't baste or anything. I just try to keep track of my layers, but you certainly could. And the idea when you stitch your petals is that you're going to stitch the petal and you're going to come off at the end, stitch one stitch, and then come down on for the petal. And you could draw all your petals and then stitch them. I really don't. I just freehand them with the machine. But if you wanted to draw them, you're basically going to be stitching about like this. And you don't want this to be too narrow down here, but it can be a little more narrow. But when you go to turn it, you're going to want to use turning tools, and so you want to have plenty of room there. And you don't want your petals too skinny, or you're going to need more than 5 to make a flower. So you could sketch all of these on here. I'm not really going to. I'm just going to sew them, and then I'm going to cut them out and turn them, and I'll show you how I do that. 1 or 2 stitches at the end. This is very similar to the leaves we've made. You want at least 3/8 of an inch between your petals here, so that when you trim it, you'll have 3/16. I do not want them to be too precise, not because the petals aren't formed precisely by nature, but because from the angle that you're at, or the wind, or the weight of the dewdrops that are on it, then they don't look completely perfectly the same. So then all these we cut out. Right here is an area where I feel like I've gotten too close to the edge, and when I do that, I just will stitch that in a little further so it's not a weak point, and even just double stitching it helps it, but I like to come in a little bit too. So see where I've done that? And then I'll cut all these out. Then we need to relieve some of this from the back. And I like to make it pretty thin on these edges, but then you can leave a lot up here at the top. So, and you can do different, you can experiment with, if you do some of them so they're kind of pointy, and some where you take more out to one side, and that will affect how it shapes out for you, because you want those to be pretty plush and filled. So we're not really stuffing the flowers, but I think of them as stuffed because we're planting in this stuffing. So these are all a little different, and it's not that important to me. And then I need to really quick turn them all. This is my favorite way to turn things. And you just buy these commercially at the store. Make sure and get between your backing and your silk, not between your underlining and your silk, or you'll have to redo that one. And then you push this through. And then each petal, you need to push into the end carefully and push out the sides. Try not to push through. I'm just going to do all these. And you could top stitch these if you wanted, and sometimes you'll want to do that for certain kinds of things, but for this look that I'm going for today, I'm not going to do that. Now, if they're not all the same length, because you know, if you're freehanding, you might make them so they're not quite the same length. Trim them to where they're pretty close to the same length before you attach them. The backing and the silk. It wouldn't matter if you did it wrong, except for this silk has definitely got a right side and a wrong side. It's pretty on the back, but it's much prettier on the front. From the needle to the guide, is not quite 3/8. I'm going to leave it there. So to get started, I like to get a few stitches in. Okay, just so that I'm in the fabric. And then you want to use your needle down a lot. You want to have needle down, and if you don't, you want to sink your needle in, and then you just push in to gather, and you do that. Now if I started stitching right now, I would likely hit my clothespin, and so I'm going to do that. But you'll see that I'm trying to keep my fingers to the side of the foot, well away from the needle, and then have only my clothespin that's in danger of getting hit. I'm going to keep adding. It's a little awkward with the camera here. I won't shoot like this very often, but I really wanted to make the point that you are not pushing in there. You're not even holding like this. And I probably get closer to my foot than you should, unless you're going to take your fingers into your own hands. This is a fast machine. I've done this more on my little machine. And if I were really going to make these, I might do that because this is a little intimidating. Okay. Now as I get to the end, what I'm going to do, took my foot off the petal because I'm going to reach in here and touch everything. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this around, and I can use this thread to help me. And I'm going to try to get over that bridge and into that piece, okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep using my clothespin, which I may call a chopstick because I use them a lot in the sewing room too. And if my camera weren't right here, I could use my knee lift, but instead I'll just use my hand. And I've got regular thread in here, but you could use a buttonhole twist in the top and the bottom, which would make this even easier. But what we're going to do is stitch just about 3/16 across the bottom here. Of each petal. And we're going to gather this old school. So we're going to do 2 lines. I don't want them to cross, but I don't want to use up any more of my petal than I have to. So I'm going to go pretty close. So we're going to take the bobbin threads, which are the white ones, and we're going to pull. We're going to do it gently because we don't want to break our threads. And we're going to get this as gathered up as we can. So that bobbin thread is as short as it can be. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to tie my 4 bobbin tails together. Try to go as tight as you can without breaking it. You might ask someone to come put a finger on that for you. See, I didn't get it that tight doing it by myself. But what we're going to do will compensate for that. So I've got this, and it's got these extra threads coming off, and I'm not going to cut them off yet, but I'm going to leave them there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go back to a very small stitch, with a 1.5 or a 2, and we're going to put this in our machine, and we're going to stitch inside of the yellow that we have already, but still firmly on the cloth. So I'm going to go around one more time and try to tighten this way up. Trying to kind of keep sunk in and kind of pivot as I go. Try to really shove that in there. Get it really shoved in before I start stitching. Put my needle back down. I jumped a little further than I wanted there. I want to go around all the way at least twice, maybe 3 times.
So I like the 5-piece that's like this in the back. And this is the one I just did. This is one I did before. And then you can just play with them. You know, you can get a really full looking thing on there. And then I'll show you how I cut this out of cork, because we're gonna play with cork for a while. And I bought about $33 worth of cork for us to play with and make at least one, maybe several projects. Maybe I'll do one for Valentine's and try to whip a couple out before Christmas. We'll see. I have one more cosmetic bag that I've promised, and but I just wanted to see what happened if you trimmed it down really fine. I kind of like this. I'm kind of partial to the one that is the antique button of my grandmother's. You can tack these down to your work however you want to do them. You could glue gun them if you really wanted to. I would use a lot of glue, and I'd use the hot kind. I have the navy, which is really supple, and this sort of, I don't even know what to call this color. I really like it though. I have to come up with what color that is. The hot pink. And then I got the cork color that has the metallic in it. And you can do fabric paint on this, and you can stencil on it, and all kinds of things. And so we might try some of that too. And that'll be next week. And I don't know how much cork stuff will do, but I got quite a bit of it. It's pricey. I bought a little bit of basting tape that I thought I would experiment with, because I've never used it and I know that a lot of people love it. But I'm going to probably feature that in the next video as well.